On the Andy Griffith Show, Ron Howard was just a boy playing Opie, and George Lindsey was the unforgettable Goober Pyle. Their chemistry on screen made audiences laugh for years, but what most fans don't know is the bond they shared when the cameras stopped rolling. Now, at 71, Ron Howard is finally opening up about George Lindsey, the truth about their friendship, the struggles Lindsey faced, and the legacy he left behind. This is the story Hollywood never really told. When audiences tuned into the Andy Griffith Show in the 1960s, they saw a slice of small-town America filled with laughter, wisdom, and unforgettable characters. At the heart of it all was a young boy named Opie, played by Ron Howard, and a cast of quirky townsfolk who brought Mayberry to life. Among them was George Lindsey, who stepped into the role of Goober Pyle in 1964, creating one of the show's most iconic comedic figures. For Ron Howard, who was just a child when he joined the series, the set of the Andy Griffith Show was more than just a workplace. It was a second home. Surrounded by seasoned actors like Andy Griffith, Don Knotts, and later George Lindsey, Howard grew up in an environment where every day was a lesson in acting, comedy, and life itself. George Lindsey's arrival to the cast marked a turning point, not just for the series, but for Howard's personal journey as well. Lindsey faced an enormous challenge when he joined the cast. He was stepping into shoes once worn by Jim Nabors, who had played the beloved Gomer Pyle before leaving for his own spin-off show. Fans adored Gomer's wide-eyed innocence, and expectations for his cousin Goober were sky-high. Lindsey knew he had to win over an audience that wasn't ready to say goodbye to Nabors. With his exaggerated mannerisms, goofy smile, and warm-hearted delivery, Lindsey transformed Goober into a character fans would come to love in his own right. Behind the scenes, George Lindsey was very different from the bumbling mechanic he portrayed. He was sharp, thoughtful, and deeply aware of the craft of comedy. For Ron Howard, who was absorbing everything around him as a budding actor, Lindsey was a quiet mentor. Lindsey taught him that comedy wasn't just about delivering punchlines. It was about timing, body language, and knowing when to hold back. Those lessons stuck with Howard long after Mayberry. Howard would later recall how Lindsey treated him with kindness and respect, even though he was just a kid. Many child actors of the era were overlooked or dismissed on set, but Lindsey made a point of including him in conversations, encouraging him, and treating him like a colleague rather than just a child star. That respect meant the world to young Ron, who was trying to balance the pressures of fame with the normal struggles of growing up. Life in Mayberry wasn't just about the work, though. Off-camera, the cast formed a tight-knit family. Andy Griffith set the tone with his warm leadership, and George Lindsey quickly became part of that circle. Lindsey's humor wasn't reserved for the cameras. He kept the crew laughing during breaks, lifting spirits when long shooting days dragged on. Ron Howard, who often felt the weight of performing at such a young age, found in Lindsey a source of comfort and encouragement. But while audiences adored Goober's comedic antics, George Lindsey sometimes struggled with the way Hollywood typecast him. Once an actor was known for a role as distinct as Goober, it became difficult to break free from it. Lindsey longed to prove he could handle more serious roles, yet casting directors often refused to see beyond the overalls and grin. Ron Howard, even as a boy, saw the tension Lindsey carried between gratitude for his success and frustration with the limitations it imposed. That awareness gave Howard an early understanding of how complex Hollywood could be. Despite those struggles, Lindsey never allowed bitterness to overshadow his kindness. He poured much of his energy into causes that mattered deeply to him, especially the Special Olympics, where he raised millions of dollars through celebrity golf tournaments. Ron Howard admired this side of Lindsey, the ability to take the fame from Mayberry and use it to do good in the world. For Howard, it was a lesson in what true legacy looks like, not just the roles you play, but the lives you touch. The dynamic between Ron Howard and George Lindsey also reflected the generational gap on the show. Howard was learning how to act and navigate fame, while Lindsey was carving out his place in the industry. Yet rather than let that divide them, they found common ground. Both were outsiders in their own ways, Howard as a child among adults, Lindsey as the actor stepping into the shadow of Jim Neighbors. That shared experience forged a quiet bond. By the time The Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, Howard was preparing for the next chapter of his career, and Lindsey was firmly entrenched as one of television's most beloved comedic sidekicks. Their paths would diverge, Howard transitioning into adulthood and later filmmaking, Lindsey continuing in Mayberry spin-offs and comedy roles. But the respect they built on that set never disappeared. In later years, Howard would look back on his time with Lindsey as formative, not only in his acting but in his outlook on life. Lindsey's ability to bring joy to others, even while wrestling with his own disappointments, showed Howard that true strength often hides behind a smile. That realization shaped the way Howard approached his own career. First as an actor, and later as a director, known for telling stories about resilience, humanity, and hope. Chapter 1 of their story is about beginnings, the young boy learning his craft and the comedian fighting to be seen beyond his overalls. Together, they created moments that still make audiences laugh today. And as Ron Howard reflects at 71, those beginnings laid the groundwork for a friendship that endured long after Mayberry faded into memory. When The Andy Griffith Show ended in 1968, it left behind a legacy that would echo through television history. But for the cast, life after Mayberry was not always easy. Ron Howard was just a teenager, already navigating the tricky transition from child actor to adult roles. George Lindsey, meanwhile, found himself tethered to Goober Pyle, a character audiences adored but one that Hollywood couldn't seem to see beyond. What happened next tested both men in different ways, shaping who they would become. For George, Lindsey, the years after The Andy Griffith Show were bittersweet. On one hand, his role as Goober had made him a household name. He continued to portray the character in the spin-off Mayberry RFD, as well as in Hee Haw, where he leaned into his comedic roots. These appearances kept him visible and beloved by audiences, but they also reinforced the typecasting that haunted him. Lindsey longed to be seen as more than just the lovable mechanic. He had trained as a serious actor, and in his heart, he wanted to prove he was capable of more. Yet casting directors rarely gave him that chance. Ron Howard, by contrast, faced a different struggle. Having grown up as Opie Taylor, he was forever linked to the wide-eyed innocence of Mayberry. Hollywood can be unforgiving to child stars, often discarding them once they've outgrown their roles. Howard, however, was determined not to become another cautionary tale. He sought out new opportunities, landing the role of Richie Cunningham on Happy Days in the 1970s. While Richie was another wholesome character, the success of the show gave Howard stability and time to plan his next move. Despite their divergent paths, Howard never forgot the lessons he learned from Lindsey. Watching Lindsey wrestle with typecasting gave Howard a clear understanding of the dangers of being pigeonholed. It's no coincidence that Howard began pursuing directing as early as his 20s, eager to expand his creative voice beyond acting. He knew the industry could trap you in a single identity if you let it. Lindsey's experience served as both a cautionary tale and a motivator. For Lindsey, the reinvention he sought wasn't so much about changing careers, but about deepening his purpose. If Hollywood wouldn't give him serious roles, he would create meaning elsewhere. That's when his dedication to the Special Olympics became a cornerstone of his life. Lindsey used his fame to raise millions of dollars for the cause, hosting celebrity golf tournaments that brought together stars, athletes, and fans. In many ways, this became his second act, not as an actor breaking free from typecasting, but as a man using his platform for good. Ron Howard admired this about Lindsey. He often spoke about how Lindsey turned disappointment into service, refusing to let frustration consume him. For Howard, who was carving out a directing career, Lindsey's example reinforced the idea that true success isn't measured only in awards or roles, but in how you impact others. Lindsey may have been known to the world as Goober, but to those he helped, he was far more than that. Their bond endured through these transitions. Though they didn't work together regularly after Mayberry, Howard and Lindsey kept in touch. Howard, moving into directing films like Night Shift and Splash, would sometimes reflect on the camaraderie of the old Mayberry days. Lindsey, meanwhile, carried pride in seeing the little boy he once teased on set grow into one of Hollywood's most respected filmmakers. He never missed a chance to say how proud he was of Howard's success. Yet beneath Lindsey's public smiles and charity work was a quiet struggle. He often spoke about the loneliness of being typecast, of feeling trapped by a role that the world refused to let him outgrow. In candid moments, he admitted to friends that he sometimes wished he'd been given more chances to prove himself. But instead of bitterness, he tried to channel those feelings into humor and generosity. That recipe. The entertainment world is filled with stories of actors who let frustration turn to anger, bitterness, or self-destruction. George Lindsey chose a different path. He embraced what he had, even as he longed for more. He brought joy to audiences, raised money for good causes, and left a mark on everyone who knew him. Ron Howard, reflecting on this, once described him as warm, intelligent, lovable. Those words reveal not just admiration, but genuine affection. By the time the 1980s and 1990s rolled around, Howard was cementing his place as one of the most important directors of his generation, while Lindsey continued to carry the Goober legacy through public appearances, reunion shows, and comedy stages. Their lives had taken very different shapes, but the thread of respect and friendship still tied them together. Chapter 2 is the story of reinvention, the young actor breaking free from the shadow of child stardom, and the seasoned comedian finding purpose in charity and service. For Ron Howard, Lindsey's journey was a reminder that the path of an artist is never simple, and that sometimes the truest measure of success lies not in the roles we play, but in the lives we touch. In the next chapter, we'll explore the later years of George Lindsey's life, his lasting influence on his castmates, and the emotional tributes that poured in when he passed away, a moment that revealed just how deeply he was loved, both in Mayberry and far beyond. As the years passed, George Lindsey's presence in Hollywood shifted. While he was no longer a fixture on primetime television, he remained a beloved figure to generations of fans who had grown up watching him in Mayberry or later on Hee Haw. For Ron Howard, who was building an extraordinary career as a director, Lindsey's enduring popularity was both a testament to the power of character-driven storytelling and a reminder of how deeply audiences can connect to sincerity and humor. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, George Lindsey had fully embraced his role as a cultural icon. He attended fan conventions, participated in cast reunions, and gave interviews where he reflected on his time as Goober Pyle. While some actors grow weary of talking about their most famous role, Lindsey recognized that Goober was a gift, one that allowed him to bring joy to millions. Fans adored him for his openness and humility. He never acted as though he was above the character that defined him. Instead, he leaned into it with gratitude, often saying that Goober had given him more than he could ever repay. At the same time, Lindsey's dedication to the Special Olympics became the crowning achievement of his later years. What started as occasional fundraising turned into a decades-long mission. Through golf tournaments, public appearances, and his connections in Hollywood, Lindsey raised over $1 million for the cause. His charity work became so significant that in many ways it overshadowed his acting. For those closest to him, Lindsey's legacy wasn't just about Mayberry, it was about his heart. Ron Howard, reflecting on Lindsey's later years, often emphasized this duality. Yes, Lindsey was a comedian, a beloved TV character, and an entertainer. But behind that, he was a man who cared deeply about giving back. Howard admired how Lindsey transformed the challenges of typecasting into an opportunity to do good in the world. While Lindsey might not have had the dramatic film career he once dreamed of, he had something arguably more important: purpose. In interviews, Lindsey revealed the emotional tug-of-war he often felt. He was grateful for Goober and the love that came with it, but he couldn't ignore the lingering sting of what could have been. He admitted that he sometimes wished he had been given more chances to prove himself outside of comedy. That honesty endeared him even more to fans, who saw in him not just a funny character, but a human being grappling with the same disappointments and hopes they did. Ron Howard, by contrast, had reached the pinnacle of Hollywood success. His films, Apollo, 13, A Beautiful Mind, and Cinderella Man, were celebrated by critics and audiences alike. He won Oscars, accolades, and the respect of his peers. Yet in moments of reflection, Howard often credited his early years on The Andy Griffith Show and the influence of castmates like George Lindsey as foundational to his growth. Lindsey's kindness, resilience, and humor left an imprint that carried into Howard's storytelling as a filmmaker. In 2012, when George Lindsey passed away at the age of 83, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Andy Griffith himself released a heartfelt statement, calling Lindsey "my friend" and praising his warmth and humor. Ron Howard's tribute stood out for its sincerity. He remembered Lindsey as warm, intelligent, and lovable, words that captured not just the public persona, but the man behind the overalls. Howard spoke of the way Lindsey treated him with respect when he was just a child on set, a gesture that meant more than Lindsey might have ever realized. Fans, too, mourned deeply. For many, Lindsey was a connection to a simpler time, a reminder of evenings spent laughing with family around the television. His death marked not just the loss of a beloved actor, but the fading of an era. Yet, as tributes made clear, Lindsey's legacy was far from over. His contributions to charity, his impact on fellow actors, and his enduring role as Goober ensured he would never be forgotten. Howard, by then a seasoned director reflecting on decades in the business, recognized the irony of Lindsey's career. While Hollywood often undervalued him, the people never did. Audiences loved him unconditionally, and that love was something no award or dramatic role could replace. Lindsey had achieved a kind of immortality, not through critical acclaim, but through laughter and kindness. For Ron Howard, Lindsey's passing was personal. It wasn't just the loss of a colleague from long ago, it was the loss of a man who had shaped his early years in ways he only fully appreciated as an adult. Lindsey's ability to balance humor with humility, disappointment with service, and fame with gratitude became part of the lens through which Howard viewed Hollywood. In many ways, Lindsey helped Howard remain grounded even as he ascended to the highest levels of the industry. Chapter 3, then, is about legacy. George Lindsey's final years were not marked by blockbuster roles or Hollywood accolades, but by something more enduring: love, respect, and service. He taught those around him, Ron Howard included, that sometimes the most important roles we play aren't on screen at all. When Ron Howard looks back on his career, it's easy to focus on the milestones: the child star who became a household name, the young actor who transitioned seamlessly into a hit sitcom, and the filmmaker who went on to direct some of Hollywood's most celebrated films. But beneath all those achievements lies a foundation built during his earliest years on The Andy Griffith Show. And among the cast members who helped shape him, George Lindsey occupies a unique and deeply personal place. For Howard, the untold. Truth about George Lindsey is simple. Behind the goofy grin of Goober Pyle was a man of remarkable depth, kindness, and resilience. It's a truth Hollywood never fully recognized, but one that Howard carries with him to this day. While fans saw Lindsey as a comic sidekick, Howard knew him as a mentor, a friend, and a man whose struggles often mirrored the challenges of the entertainment world itself. Howard has often spoken about how Lindsey treated him with a respect that was unusual for child actors at the time. On many sets, young performers were seen as expendable, cute faces to drive ratings, but not to be taken seriously. Lindsey defied that norm. He talked to Howard as though his opinions mattered, encouraged him to keep learning, and even gave him small lessons in comedic timing. Those interactions may have seemed ordinary in the moment, but they left a permanent mark on Howard. Years later, when he became a director, Howard adopted the same approach, treating every member of his cast and crew, no matter their age or status, with dignity. Another untold truth is the way Lindsey's quiet struggles shaped Howard's determination to diversify his career. Watching Lindsey battle typecasting impressed upon Howard the importance of avoiding creative confinement. Howard knew he could have easily been trapped as Opie forever. Instead, he made conscious choices to step away from acting and pursue directing, even when people doubted him. In many ways, Lindsey's frustrations became Howard's fuel. Howard wanted to build a career where no single role defined him, where he could explore as many stories as possible. Yet Howard also admired Lindsey's response to those frustrations. While Lindsey yearned for broader roles, he refused to let disappointment turn into bitterness. Instead, he turned outward, toward charity, humor, and connection with fans. Howard has said that Lindsey's dedication to the Special Olympics was nothing short of inspiring. It showed him that even when Hollywood doesn't give you everything you want, you can still live a life of profound purpose. The untold truth also involves the enduring bond between the two men. While their careers took very different paths, they maintained a mutual respect that never wavered. Howard would go on to win Academy Awards and direct blockbuster films, while Lindsey remained forever tied to Mayberry. But success didn't create distance. It deepened Howard's appreciation for Lindsey. Every time he revisited those early years, Howard found himself remembering the laughter, the lessons, and the quiet strength Lindsey brought to the set. When George Lindsey passed away in 2012, Howard's public tribute captured these truths in just a few words. He called Lindsey warm, intelligent, and lovable, a description that spoke volumes. For Howard, those words weren't just polite condolences. They were an acknowledgement of the deeper man behind the character. In Lindsey, Howard saw someone who embraced joy even when life dealt him disappointments. Someone who gave generously without expecting recognition, someone who, in his own way, embodied the best of Mayberry. Today, as Ron Howard reflects at 71, the story of George Lindsey is woven into his own journey. The director who built a career on telling stories of humanity and resilience, Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Cinderella Man, owes part of his perspective to the lessons learned from Lindsey. The way Lindsey balanced humor with hardship, fame with humility, continues to echo in Howard's work. In many ways, Howard's storytelling reflects Lindsey's influence, an insistence on finding the heart in every tale, the humanity in every character. The untold truth, then, is that George Lindsey's legacy isn't just about laughter or even charity. It's about the ripple effect he had on those who knew him. Ron Howard's career may seem galaxies away from Goober's garage in Mayberry, but the roots of his empathy, his respect for collaboration, and his resilience trace back to people like Lindsey. For fans of The Andy Griffith Show, Goober Pyle will always be remembered as the goofy mechanic who made them laugh. But thanks to Ron Howard's reflections, we know the fuller picture. George Lindsey was a man who turned limitations into opportunities for kindness, who gave endlessly to others, and who left behind lessons that still shape one of Hollywood's greatest storytellers. In the end, the story of Ron Howard and George Lindsey isn't just about two actors from Mayberry. It's about the invisible threads of influence that connect people across time. It's about how a man often underestimated by Hollywood helped shape another who would rise to its highest ranks. And it's about how, even decades later, Ron Howard continues to carry forward the truth about George Lindsey, a truth that deserves to be told.